This episode is brought to you by DistroKid. DistroKid is the easiest way for musicians to get their music into all the platforms: Amazon, Apple, Tidal, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and more. Plus, you've got unlimited uploads, and the artist keeps 100% of what they make. But what I love most about DistroKid is their app. The design of it just makes the whole process so easy. Now you can be sure that you're doing everything you need to do to get your music out there. Go to distrokid.com to check it out or download the app now.
Allow me to live and breathe like a man.
You've heard his words on classic albums like Pacific Ocean Blue and Friends. His 1969 collaboration with Brian Wilson, A World of Peace Must Come, gained almost legendary status as one of pop's most storied lost albums, before being resurrected to great acclaim by Light in the Attic in 2008. Now you're cordially invited to take a trip into the mind of poet and songwriter Stephen J. Kalinich. Heyday Again Records presents I Love My Life, a postcard from one of the last standing poets of peace and excitation. Order your copy today. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich and Friends. You'll see why heavy hitters like Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, Paul McCartney, Steve Cropper, P.F. Sloan, and Diana Ross have all worked with him. I Love My Life by Stephen J. Kalinich. Order today at realgonemusic.com. Again, that's realgonemusic.com.
That's the first time I met Joni, and after that we went to her hotel room and she played me 18 of the best songs I'd ever heard in my life, and I fell totally in love with her at that moment. There was no way. And I know what magic feels like, and I know what choices are, and I wanted to be with this woman.
I know that you're completely happy in your life right now. I know how contented, without having to ask, that you are with Amy. But have you ever talked with her about whether or not she felt sending that telegram to you about trying to grip sand too tightly in your hand was a mistake to send? Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Crosby, Stills, and Nash, along with our special guest, Graham Nash. This episode is part of a series called Wild Tales, the Graham Nash Interview Series, in which we discuss every last release the great Graham Nash ever had a hand in creating, including CSN, CSNY, CNN, and his solo career, and it details a history almost too crazy to be believed. Here's just a few of the many things that Graham and I discuss in this podcast. The reasons why he split from the Hollies in the director's cut only, a recounting of the very first time he met Crosby and Stills, plus the fateful question they posed to him that night. Exactly who was Captain Manyhands, and why was he so crucial to the success of that debut album? The several identities behind the amalgam of personalities that Crosby sung about in Guinnevere, the very first time that Graham met Joni Mitchell, and an in-depth deep dive on every song that comprises the Crosby, Stills, and Nash LP. If you're a Crosby, Stills, and Nash superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features 20 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Coming up, we've got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, plus Season 3 of the Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True series, which will absolutely, without question, delve deeper into pet sounds and smile than anyone else ever has in history. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! All right, I'm going to be honest with you. Since we last spoke and you agreed to do this, I have spent most of my waking life listening to your music, re-listening to. I listened to everything you've ever done for the last 62 years.
Good Lord.
And I listened and re-listened and re-listened, and I made notes, and that's pretty much all I've done except for take care of my 6-year-old.
We have made a lot of music.
You have made a tremendous... I mean, for a guy who has written Wasted on the Way and means the sentiment, you definitely were prolific enough.
Well, there's much more to go, kid.
I can't wait.
Don't forget to really take time and take care of your 6-year-old.
I do. Yeah. I mean, when I say I haven't been neglecting him when he's at school.
Yes, of course.
I switch into Graham Nash mode.
Good. Yeah. So let's rock.
Okay, let's do it. Today's guest has written some of the most beautiful music that I've ever heard, including some monster hits that'll live on forever, such as King Midas in Reverse, Marrakesh Express, Our House, Teach Your Children, Just a Song Before I Go, Cathedral, and Wasted on the Way. The reductive take is that Stills wrote the blues and Cuban work, Crosby wrote the weird stuff, and Nash handled the poppy material. But don't let his effortlessly pretty music fool you. This man has spent inordinate amounts of time exploring life's dark underbelly. Thankfully, he never walked the full length of the plank. But some of his co-workers certainly did, and he took notes, which he then had a knack for setting to deliriously tuneful music. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Crosby, Stills, and Nash in '97, and again as a member of the Hollies in 2010. Twice, not bad. He was appointed an officer of the Order of the British Empire in the 2010 Birthday Honors List for services to music and to charity. He holds 4 honorary doctorates, including one from the New York Institute of Technology, one in music from the University of Salford in 2011, and one in fine arts from Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Impressive, all of it. But for me, the key to unlocking his greatness is not his youthful hippie yearning for an idealistic society, but his honest admissions of having consistently fallen short in living up to those ideals. Toward that end, he is absolutely the real deal. He was the wild card of the Hollies who continuously pushed them toward the far-out spaces they were uncomfortable exploring, yet somehow crossed the pond and found himself viewed as the stable voice of reason, which makes him, that's right, too crazy for the Hollies, yet too sane for CSNY. Lads and ladies, it's the introspective optimist himself, Graham Nash.
Wow, that is such an intro. Yes. Yeah. What an interesting life so far.
Really, the idea I had for this interview was inspired by how close you and David came to burying the hatchet between the two of you at the end of your life, which,
yes.
I know the story behind that. You were literally a day away, right?
Yeah. As with most of my relationship with David, it always took weird turns along the path. And at the end there, I got a voicemail from David saying that he wanted to talk to me. And I replied by telling him that, aren't you the guy that thinks I'm, the devil? Aren't you the guy that won't share a microphone with me ever again? Aren't you that guy? Why would I want to talk to you? He replied by saying that he wanted to apologize for all the nasty things he said about me and about his recognition of what I had done for him in his life. I set up a meeting, a FaceTime meeting, because I wanted to look him in the eyes when we were talking. I set it up for 2:00 my time, which is 11:00 in California, where David lived. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and it never came. The call never came. And 2 days later, he was dead.
It's unbelievable. I mean, even just thinking about that, because in the past, I've probably thought a little bit disproportionately too much about your relationship with him. And in fact, I'm a filmmaker and I wrote a screenplay where the main woman and man were based on a comment that you said about him a while ago, where you tried to take more drugs than him, you tried to take less drugs than him, you tried everything in your approach to your friendship with him, especially in the late 70s, early 80s. And, as somebody who has pondered your relationship, I can only imagine, and I certainly do not have any kind of a crazed, out of control ego to think that this would go towards being an act of healing, but it was intended, for whatever that means, as something like that. And also a celebration of a lifetime that was packed with a lot of the greatest music ever made. Not just some of it, but a lot of the greatest music ever made is because the two of you crossed paths. And like I told you before we started this, it's because of that fact that my research spun wildly out of control. And so initially this was intended only as Crosby and Nash. Then I wrote to you asking, can we please do a few of your solo records? And if I can only remember my name, and you said graciously yes. And then I said, can we please do CSN? And I didn't get a response back, but I couldn't stop at that point because I was in over my head, as I'm sure you understand.
I do.
But everything that you've released and things that you haven't, because I found the original version of Marrakesh Express with your vocal, everything that you've released and things that you haven't, from the May 63 debut single of the Hollies, Ain't That Just Like Me, to your most recent May 2023 solo album Now, had 60 years of music and more to come, like you said. So no offense to Stephen and Neil, but this conversation will center on you and David and the relationship that the two of you enjoyed, a friendship that went far beyond music. That was in itself a marriage between two men, really.
Indeed.
Two men who, as far as I can tell, truly loved each other, regardless of what went down in later years.
Absolutely.
This is for David. So what you guys mean to me. There were periods through my life during which you guys were my favorite band, no matter what acronym you were using at the time. And I still go through phases where I can't listen to anything else, where nothing else makes sense to my ears. So I'm going to introduce the characters in today's episode in the order in which they appear on your first album cover. Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, David Crosby, and then, of course, a shadowy figure who pops in and out, Neil Young. So, in case you've been living under a rock for a very, very long time, or you're a Gen Z who does not look beyond the 21st century, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and sometimes Young, is a folk rock supergroup comprised of three legendarily talented singer-songwriters. You have David Crosby from the Byrds, Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield, and Graham Nash from the Hollies, plus Neil Young, also from the Springfield, which wound up provoking a name change to Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. You're, of course, known for some of the most beautiful vocal harmonies of all time, your political activism, and conversely, and very interestingly, I think, although I'm sure there's regret buried in there, some of the most tumultuous relationships in rock history, a true soap opera of substance-fueled backstage antics, which to me only textures the music. So let's talk about the run-up. Graham Nash was born on February 2nd, 1942 in Blackpool, Lancashire, which is where your mother had been evacuated from her hometown of Salford. Isn't that right?
That's correct, yes. The pregnant ladies were sent outside the bombing area. Obviously, the German army and navy and aircraft were trying to sever the pipeline between Manchester and Liverpool, which is where the canal was, where most of the goods and services came from. And so the Germans wanted to destroy that pipeline. And so Manchester and Liverpool were heavily bombed. So my mother was evacuated to Blackpool, as you say.
And then you came back to Salford, right, where you grew up?
I did. I never quite understood why you would be born in Blackpool and then 2 weeks later sent back to the bombing area. I never could figure that out.
And then would you say that the first impactful thing that happened in your life that you remember was meeting Alan Clark?
Yes, musically, that is a great memory. I've known Alan since we were both 6 years old. We started singing in the school choir in the mornings when you did the Lord's Prayer and you sang. I always took the harmony and he always took the melody for some reason. We never talked about that. That's what we did. And so, yes, in a musical sense, my relationship with Alan Clark started it all.
Now, there's the legendary story, which you and I have even spoken about, that second meeting of Crosby and Stills has basically gone down in mythology. I mean, I'm sure you could sleepwalk your way through telling that story because you've said it so much. But you actually met those guys in 1966 during a Hollies U.S. tour. So do you actually have any memories of the first time you met them?
I certainly have a memory of the first time I met David, and I certainly have a memory of the first time I met Stephen. But what you refer to is when the Hollies played the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, and they were in the audience. And I had known David, I had just met Stephen, and after the Hollies show, I left with David and Stephen. And we were driving around in Stephen's Bentley. It was actually a Bentley that had a few dents in it. So he called it the Bentley. And I remember distinctly, I was sitting in the back. David was in the passenger seat. Stephen was driving. And we came to a light in Hollywood Boulevard. And David said to Stephen, which one of us is going to steal him? And I knew what they meant. Let's talk about Cass for a moment. Every album since she passed away, at some point in all the liner notes, there is a note that acknowledges the incredible energy that she gave us. I think that she understood very plainly as a musician what my voice would sound like with David and Stephen. And I believe that she totally understood what that would be. I believe that when we first sang in Joni's living room, I think that we surpassed Cassie's expectations because it really was a truly magical moment. When I first heard, us do You Don't Have to Cry in 3-part, my life changed totally. I would have to leave the Hollies and come and live in America and follow that magical sound, which is exactly what I did.
Did you know at that moment, was it like a bolt of purpose that shot through you? Or did you have to think through it, make a list of pros and cons? Was it that moment?
No, there was no pros, no cons. It was magic. I knew it. David knew it. Stephen knew it. And we knew, all three of us, that our life had just changed. Much for the better, because obviously the Hollies and the Springfield and the Byrds are decent harmony bands, but this was something completely different. It was a unique vocal sound that we had created when we put our three voices together to try and make them into one. And it was that sound that drove all of us nuts. It drove us crazy. I did, in fact, have to go back and after the London Palladium show, tell the Hollies that I was leaving.
Not just the Hollies. Of all the research I did, which was almost endless, the image that stays with me the most, the only thing I don't know is, did you fly? Did you take a boat? How did you get to America?
I flew the next day.
The next day?
Yep, December 8th was the last show the Hollies ever did, and I took a plane on the evening of December 10th. I had to spend a day collecting my stuff, or else, if I didn't have to do that, I'd have flown the next day, but I flew 2 days later back to Los Angeles.
Okay, so you didn't just leave a successful band. You left your wife, Rose Eccles, and you left England. You pushed all your chips onto the table to form CSN. So
that's right.
On the way over here, thinking of that plane ride that you took, and I know you've told me that you have absolutely no nerves when it comes to performing, but were you completely sure of yourself? Because you even said, the direction you took was not as successful as the prior direction that the Hollies had taken. Were you shitting your pants? Because that's a hell of a big risk.
It is, but I'm a musician. I know what magic is, and I had heard magic. And I put all my chips on the table, as you said, because I wanted that magic in my life.
Yeah.
It was spectacularly momentous moment when the three of us first sang together.
So in early 69, you guys signed with Atlantic. And now just for a minute, back to just you and David. Let's strip Stephen out of it for a second. So since you had been a songwriter that David had admired previous to meeting you, David has remarked that it was only when you kind of whooped for joy when you heard Crosby's critical mass before it was part of your song that he began to believe that he was actually a good songwriter. From what I've read, it was you justifying what he did that made him believe in himself. You know, especially all the wordless stuff that he did, which is actually my favorite Crosby stuff. I mean, it's no wonder that you guys became fast friends. He looked up to you. He admired you like a big brother.
He did indeed. One of the things that people should try and find on YouTube is a BBC program that David and I did in early 71, I think. And I think you'll understand if you watch that and listen to it. I think it's only like 6 or 7 songs, but you will realize how much trust David had in me to sing with him. I really understood his music. I really loved what he did musically. Well, for instance, Stephen never really got David's music. He couldn't find the chords. You know, it was always a struggle for Stephen to figure out what the fuck David was doing. But I understood it completely. And that BBC show shows it.
Isn't David, personality-wise, truly the opposite of the general character of the British man?
Absolutely. But it's that opposite that makes the magic.
Right. So, I'm guessing at this point, you guys are pretty much in agreement that as far as, in a band having to act the same, look the same, and think the same things, that all three of you were done with the idea of ever being in a band again. And you thought that being in a collective would take care of that kind of issue. Except there's only one thing you didn't count on, which is that if you put the kinds of strong characters that all of you are together, you get infighting of such an intense variety that it actually became as intense as your collective desire for peace and love in the Woodstock Nation at large, wasn't it?
Way more intense.
Yeah.
Our disagreements were on a level of spiritual almost.
Right. That's just up around the bend. I mean, for now, it's sheer bliss of the once in a lifetime kind. You're not dealing with that at this point, right?
No. Because we knew that album that we made, the first Crosby, Stills and Nash album, was going to be incredibly popular. Well, I mean, like I said, we've had hits with the Springfield and the Byrds and the Hollies. We knew what was radio friendly, and we knew that we had an album that when it came out of the radio, you would absolutely have to go and listen. And that's why we used Sweet Judy Blue Eyes to open the album, because I defy anybody who is sitting listening to that to get up and take the needle off. There's no way.
This is phase 1, the Great Woodstock Nation Rock Royalty Coronation, 1969 to... And this is the only time in this show's history that I'm giving you a chance to guess when this phase ends.
In a way, it's still going on today.
I always subjectively cut a band's career up in phases. So for you guys being like the kings of the counterculture, I have that as 69 to 74. And then it enters into a different phase. Just as powerful, but different.
Yeah, different.
Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. All right, so let's talk about that first record. This is a major hit of the kind that really doesn't happen anymore. Not only does it peak at number 6 on Billboard, but it's on the charts for 107 weeks. That really doesn't happen. I mean, that's a thing of the past. The first single ever is Marrakesh Express. It goes 4 times platinum, and it's the only album in your history where Captain Manyhands basically creates the bed and then you guys sing over it. Is that correct?
That is absolutely perfect, the way you said that. And that was one of the reasons why we got Neil. Because when we realized how popular that first record was going to be, we realized that we have to tour with it. But how do you tour when Stephen played bass, he played rhythm guitar, he played lead guitar, he played piano, he played B3 organ, and he played percussion on some tracks? So what do you do when one of the members did a lot of the music? Of course, David and I did our guitars on Lady of the Island and A Long Time Gone and Guinnevere and Marrakesh, you know. But Stephen was a genius at putting, like you said, a bed to our music, which we sang on. Once we had that foundation that Stephen had created, it was an incredibly strong foundation. And in its own right was wonderful. When we added our voices, it went to another place entirely, and that's why it was as popular as it was.
It's kind of an unrepeated record. Even when you take Neil away for the 1977 record, the vibe on that record is completely different from this one.
Yep.
And I love, of course, the story with you guys and Henry Diltz. What a great guy to have aligned yourselves with. Still to this day, just like a pixie. I mean, like a magical pixie, that guy.
Yeah. Well done. Well done, because he is a magical pixie.
He really is. I've known him for a bunch of years. I didn't know him back then, but I would imagine that in a lot of really key instrumental ways, he's never changed.
No, he's still the same magical pixie he's always been since the day I met him.
Yeah. So you guys took the pictures. A few days later, you decided on the name of your collective. And then you came back because you realized you were out of order. And of course, they had plowed the house down.
Yeah.
And that was at 815 Palm Avenue, West Hollywood, in case you're going on a sightseeing tour. My favorite thing about the record cover is that it is a perfect summing up of the down-home simplicity of the sound of the record, but it's underplaying the fact that you guys really are rock royalty. I mean, you're a feet on the ground kind of guy, but certainly at that time, you're like a king in pauper's clothes, basically.
Yeah, well, that's a good description.
But it doesn't push that idea. And then you have Dallas, staring swarthily from inside the house.
Yeah.
Now, the legacy of this record, you really can't say enough about it. In a lot of ways, it invented the 70s, the singer-songwriter movement, the honesty of it, your adeptness at confession in your lyrics. It created the music industry of the 70s, especially in California.
Yeah, I think you may have pushed it a little far in terms of inventing that. But yes, in California, particularly that album cover, and the idea to put Dallas Taylor in there was Stephen's idea, and it was Gary Burton that managed to put him in that window. A lot of people think it was Neil, but it's not. In fact, it's Dallas. And yes, that house was gone when we went to retry and shoot the shot. That's why a lot of people came up to me and said, hey, you know what? Guinevere's a great tune, man. Yeah, right. It wasn't me.
Okay, so in 1970, you guys very deservedly won a Grammy for Best New Artist. In 1999, the record was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. Let's go track for track through this, okay? Sweet Judy Blue Eyes is one of, I don't even know how many songs that Stephen wound up writing for Judy Collins. The poor women who entered into your orbit got just a panoply of tunes written about them. Not just one passing tune. I mean, if you put a compilation together of Rita Coolidge songs, you'd probably have a box set, right?
Yeah, Rita.
The Raven, right? As she's called?
Yes, Cherokee, yes.
Right. So from what I understand, and I could be wrong about this, but this song was so highly personal that it wasn't even intended as a song when it was written, but actually a letter between Stills and Judy trying to settle their differences and work out where to go.
That's right. I was given an album by my friend Joe in New Jersey. The story is that he was in a band and they were rehearsing in a studio. And Joe Colasuro said, "Why are we rehearsing in a studio?" So the studio owner said that we're going out of business. I just want to get as much money as I can before I shut it down. And Joe was probably smoking a joint, but he said it was a cigarette in the parking lot, and saw a dumpster full of tapes. So Joe goes to the owner. He goes, what's the story with the tapes? He said, "As I said, I'm shutting down. You can go in there, you can have whatever you want." And Joe went through a dumpster full of tapes, and he found two that said Steve Stills. Now then, Stephen gets infuriated when people call him Steve. So I knew that this must be a really early thing. And it was a 2-track. What happened is that Judy was recording in the studio. They wanted to go to dinner. He said, "Go to dinner, but can I stay with the engineer and just roll the tape?" He said, "Absolutely." There were 19 things on it. And the Sweet Judy Blue Eyes was in 4 pieces, not put together yet. But, you know, you'd hear him go, tuning, change partners. Then he'd retune his guitar and he'd do Helplessly Hoping, and then he'd tune his guitar and do the first part of the suite. It was a brilliant album. When we actually recorded the suite, we spent 11 hours on it. Once we had gotten Stephen's bed, as you referred to, and we did the vocals, it was very exciting when we got to it. At one point, Stephen looked at Halvorson and he said, "I don't think we have it. Let's do it again." We have a second take.
It's excellent. The one with the drum track is still excellent. I would have been stuck and totally confused as to which one to release.
That's right. But, you know, I think that Stephen was right in questioning whether we had it. When he listened to the, 11 or 12-hour reversion of the suite, he said, "Yeah, we definitely didn't get it there. Let's stay with the original." But there is, in fact, like you said, a track of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes with all the voices, but with Dallas on drums.
Yeah, they're both amazing. And it's almost progressive in the way that it's multi-parted, except for the fact that it's so unbelievably catchy that you have to be made of stone to not get swept away by it and sing along with it. It's dementedly catchy. And by the way, that Just Roll tape album that you were referring to is phenomenal. And for some reason, it's listed as April 68, even though it was recorded in August of 68, which was 1 month after his Super Session thing.
Right, with Bloomfield, yes.
Yeah. But yeah, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, I mean, talk about kicking things off with a bang. And then Marrakesh Express, again, as catchy as it comes. This is about, was it a holiday you took in the summer of 66 from the Hollies?
Yes. Summer of 66, I took a train down from Casablanca to Marrakesh, and on the way, as usual, I'm trying to be as open 360 degrees always, visually and audio-wise. I just found the original lyrics from Marrakesh Express. They're in a Robert Heinlein book I was reading, I think called something like Silver Locusts or something like that. Anyway, I found the original words. But once again, when you have found a record, the track that will open up a record, and you know that no one's going to take the needle off, you're definitely not taking the needle off after you hear Marrakesh Express right after it.
No, but you have, previous to that, the goosh goosh thing that David does. Was that I'm not going to attempt to imitate the entire thing, but was that an in-joke that you guys had?
Yeah, it was something that David said, and we thought, you know what, let's put it on there. There are no rules. It's whatever makes us feel good. And it made us feel good to put that really strange phrase by David on.
That's awesome. So you gave up your first class ticket in order to go to another part of the train that was going to be of more interest to you, right?
Absolutely.
You were talking about being with all the ladies with blue hair, right?
Right. That was in the first class compartment. I was sharing it with two older American ladies who did, in fact, have their gray hair dyed blue. So I go down to the third class compartment where it was really happening. I mean, it truly was, on the stage, I make a joke about it, Willie Nelson and Snoop Dogg having a smoke-a-thon in there. The air was clouded with smoke, mainly from the fires that some of the people in Morocco were trying to, make mint tea. There were ducks and pigs and chickens running all over the place. It was a crazy, crazy time.
It was basically a diaristic account of exactly what you saw, right?
Right. We just did a show for Ziggy Wilf. Ziggy Wilf owns the Minnesota Vikings. And about a week ago was May 1st, right? Ziggy wanted me to play at his birthday party. And so we did. But after I said, hello, Ziggy, how are you? You look fine. Everything's good. And he goes, wait, did you really take a train from Casablanca to Marrakesh? I said, yeah, I did. He said, so did I. And my God, you pinned the atmosphere exactly. And I knew that I was going to be okay with a billionaire, who owned a football team.
That's great. It's amazing that, the way that life progresses and you don't think, when you were on that train, there's no way for you to have known that along with one or two other songs, that would wind up being the fork in the road for you in your life.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I cherish my decision. You got to understand life is made up of choices. Do I go this way? Do I go that way? Do I talk to him? Do I talk to her? Do I do this? Life is choices. And I made the right choice. Once I had heard how Marrakesh Express turned out, I really started to believe in myself as a writer. And that's one of the things that David did for me very early on. The Byrds had been in England. I asked David to come and stay with me in my apartment, which he did. And he was there at the last show that the Hollies ever did. He was there in backstage in the London Palladium. And it was then that David said, hey, wait a second. That Marrakesh Express song you got, that's a great song, man. He said, fuck these guys. They're the ones that are crazy, talking about the Hollies, not wanting to record Marrakesh. But it was really David that the worst thing you can do to a musician is give them self-doubt.
Right.
And it was David that removed that self-doubt from me. And it was the record we made of Marrakesh Express that really, really made me understand that my choice to leave the Hollies was totally correct.
For whatever it's worth, your version with the Hollies, they play their instruments like they're asleep, but you're giving it your all. But I can hear in your voice, too, that you recognize what's going on around you, but you're trying to push it out of your purview so that you can focus on kicking its ass. But it's a tough one. You can hear the dynamics at play.
Indeed. Don't forget to send me that track.
I promise. The second that we're off, I'm sending it to you. This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount. All right, so Guinnevere, there's infinite amounts of reasons why I love this song. Number one is it truly is the birth of Crosby and Nash. There's no Stephen on this track.
That's right.
And David himself says that he thinks it may be his best song. I may agree. I'm not sure because he has so many good ones, but it's certainly in his top 3.
Yeah, and it should be. You can't hear it, but Dallas Taylor is playing drums on that.
Really?
Yeah. It took me a long time to get Halverson to remove the drums. And you can actually, in one of the one of those chords where there's a long chord, you can hear, if you really listen, a little of the cymbal that we couldn't.
Like full on drums, not even percussive elements, just drums?
Full on drums.
That's nuts. I can't even imagine that.
Me neither. That's why we took them off.
Yeah, no kidding. So, I know there's been a lot of mystery. Christine Hinton is obviously verse number 2, and Joni Mitchell is verse 3. But the other one, he has kept cloaked in secrecy, the identity of verse 1. But I'm assuming it refers to Nancy Ross, because she drew pentagrams on the wall, and she left Crosby for Graham Parsons in '66, who was the grandson of a citrus fruit magnate. And in the song, peacocks wandered aimlessly underneath an orange tree. Is it Nancy, Graham?
With all honesty, David never told me who it was. But if Nancy did, in fact, draw pentagrams, that's a dead giveaway, isn't it?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of my favorite songs of all time. The alternate tunings, or as Joni puts it so eloquently, chords of inquiry. It really sets a scene to the extent that I felt like even as a young teenager, whenever this song would come on, before I ever smoked pot, I was in an alternate universe the second it started. You can't help but be transported completely.
And it was, in fact, the birth of CSN, of Crosby Nash, excuse me.
Yeah. There is no Stephen on this, right?
No.
Yeah. And then, of course, on the CSN box, that, you're behind all these box sets, which if you don't know, all the box sets that came out of the entire nexus of the CSNY people, it's you and Joel, right?
Yeah, me and Joel Bernstein and Stanley Johnson, who passed away, a dear friend. Yeah, but me and Joel, basically.
So you found an incredible demo version of this with Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane and the great Cyrus Faryar of Modern Folk Quartet on bouzouki.
That's right. And don't forget, he was Henry Diltz's partner.
Yeah.
In the Modern Folk Quartet, yes.
Cyrus had a couple of amazing solo records as well that kind of sound like Fred Neil solo records. They had a similar kind of feel to them.
Fred was very important, particularly to David. I think David gives Fred Neil great compliments, as a songwriter and just as a guitar man, And I think that was recognized by Harry Nilsson also when he did it. Go ahead.
Then comes You Don't Have to Cry, which, definitely proves that you're not the only one who's proficient at pop songcraft, because this kind of follows the Graham Nash template, at least at that time. If you didn't know who wrote this, I would have guessed that it was you.
How interesting. No, but that was the very first song that we ever sang together, and those memories are precious to me.
It was the door you walked through.
That's right.
When you sang the song for the first time, I saw a clip of you guys singing, and you're so locked in that you burst out laughing. Is that from that actual moment?
Yep. That's exactly what happened. Once they'd done it twice, and then I said, I've listened to the way David phrases. I understand how long Stephen holds a note. I looked at the body language of both of you. Let's sing it again. When we did that, within the first 45 seconds of the song, we had to stop and laugh because it was insane. It was, in a way, God-given.
Yeah. No, I definitely believe that, because something like what happened with you guys, it's not an accident.
No.
It couldn't be.
No. Choices again, And when I heard that magic, choices were made for me. I knew what I had to do. So did David and Stephen, too.
Yeah, well, and David had something to prove, because I think when Roger told them we'll be so much more successful without you, that was all that David needed for the rest of his life. I've heard him quote Roger so many times that he said that I feel like that was the only fuel he ever really needed.
That was the self-doubt that I talked about earlier that you should never give to a musician.
Right. So Pre-Road Downs is the first song that you wrote after moving to America, right?
Correct.
And I feel like there's such a sense of freedom and liberation of having left the Hollies and there being no one breathing down your neck that, I feel like you're excitedly overcompensating after years of being suppressed lyrically. I mean, it's the first song ever to use the word roaches, right?
Yeah, I believe so. And that was Stephen.
Oh, it was?
Yes, Stephen wrote that Roaches part.
What a great song. I love this song.
Yeah, it was me realizing that I would have to go on the road and therefore I would have to separate myself from Joan.
When did your relationship with Joni really begin?
In Ottawa in, I believe, early 67.
Okay. So was that during when David was with her? Because the self-titled debut record that she did, he was very briefly with her. Was that, I know it was the 60s, but was this kind of at the same time?
It may have been. But once again, I know magic when I see it. And after the Hollies show, there was a get-together where you have a plastic cup of awful wine and you're trying to remember the name of the producer, and Robin Britton, who was our publicist at the time, was trying to talk to me. And I said, Robin, I'm not hearing a word you're saying. I'm trying to check out this beautiful woman in the corner. And he said, well, if you fucking listen to me, I'm telling you that's Joni Mitchell and she wants to meet you. Because David told her if I was ever around her that we must meet. And so I was delighted that this woman that I saw in a pale blue short dress with what looked like a huge Bible on her lap was fascinating to me. And I walked over and I introduced myself and we started talking. And I said, why are you carrying a Bible with you? She said, it's not a Bible, it's a music box. Listen. And she opened the lid, the little melody came out, but it was so old that one of the notes was totally wrong. And we started laughing about it. This one particular note that was wrong in the old music box. But that's the first time I met Joni. And after that, we went to her hotel room in the, I think it was the Chateau Laurier, yes, in Ottawa. And the Hollies were staying there also at the same time because it's one of the biggest hotels then in Ottawa. And she played me, 18 of the best songs I'd ever heard in my life. And I fell totally in love with her at that moment. There was no way. And I know what magic feels like. And I know what choices are. And I wanted to be with this woman.
I know that you're completely happy in your life right now. I know how contented, without having to ask, that you are with Amy. But I can't imagine, because every interview you talk about her, and certainly you can hear it. Every time I listen to Simple Man, my fucking heart breaks. I know in a way you feel like she was your soulmate. I don't need to ask you about that. Have you ever talked with her about whether or not she felt sending that telegram to you about trying to grip sand too tightly in your hand was a mistake to send?
I haven't talked to Joan about those moments. Once again, it's choices. Do you remember the awful times or do you want to remember the great times? And I choose with David and with Joan to only remember the great stuff. But yeah, Simple Man was written about 2 days after we had broken up. CSNY were doing the Fillmore East. The way that we used to do it is we'd come out as 3, then come out as 4, and then we would each do individual sections. And I'd written Simple Man that morning. I wanted to play it. I knew it wasn't quite finished. I didn't care. I wanted to let Joan know that I just wanted to hold her. I don't want to hold her down. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very simple line, but the line about me being so much in love and never hurt so bad at the exact same time is totally true.
You cannot really go for your dreams in a way that is full and complete without having parts of you that are shattered. And I know you left behind a life. And, honestly, from what I understand, if she had not given her child up for adoption, she would not have a music career because she has said that all of that writing was because she had given, there's a piece of her that was just floating around out there.
That's right. And, thankfully they've reconnected.
Right.
And thankfully it's a good, healthy relationship. But one of the reasons, of course, why I haven't talked to Joan, about the intimate things that happened between us is that, for the last 3 or 4 years, she's recovering from, her aneurysm where a blood vessel burst in her brain. And she was lying on her kitchen floor for a couple of days before anybody found her. Right. So she's still, even to this day, she's trying to recover from that. One of the things I did say to her when I played Our House, when everybody else did a Joni song at her 75th birthday party at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, I said, "Hey, Joan, anything coming, Any ideas for songs, anything, painting, anything, drawing, anything coming?" She looked at me and she said, "No, not yet."
Well, just watching her play guitar, that one spot where she had that guitar solo in her show was such a relief to watch. I mean, she killed it. She was amazing.
Yeah.
So she's, slowly but surely, with a lot of people's help, there's a lot of love lifting her up. So
that's right. Particularly somebody like Brandi Carlile.
Yeah, exactly. So back to the record. Wooden Ships was written and composed in '68 in Florida on the Mayan by David, who wrote the music. And then Paul Kantner and Stills wrote most of the lyrics.
Not most of the lyrics. Wooden Ships was David through and through. And he had a lot of the song already done. Yes, Paul and Stephen helped, but only just helped, because most of it was done. When David wrote, the lyrics, it's definitely David that wrote them. You can feel it in the lyrics itself.
Although the science fiction aspect is very blows against the empire, which of course you had a hand in. But, David talks about that little Baptist church sign in Florida that kicked things off that said, "If you smile at me, I'll understand," because I love that that's a sign that he saw.
Yeah, well, it's the same with Cowboy of Dreams,
right?
That I wrote about Neil. The same thing. There was a sign on the church, that I incorporated into a song. But yeah, Wooden Ships, what a great piece of music.
It really is. And a little bit out of character, which I love, because the sci-fi aspect of it gives it just that kind of otherness that takes it out of the realm of the record. And it's kind of an oasis on its own, especially the verse about radiation and death. Wasn't that Stephen who added that part? Or was that David as well?
I believe it was David.
Okay.
Particularly, he was always a fan of sci-fi, always. And just one thing to reiterate here, Cass Elliot is the only other person that ever sang with CSN.
Right.
She sings on Pre-Road Downs.
Yeah. She's amazing.
She's
amazing on it. Is that true? She's the only guest singer?
I can't think of another one.
Well, except for Daylight Again, obviously, yeah.
But that was Arthur.
Right. Well, and Timothy Schmidt.
Yes.
Yeah. But that was obviously extenuating circumstances. That almost doesn't count. And I also love the story, which I believe is in the liner notes to the box set. Jackson Browne asking David Crosby, "What about the guys who can't escape?" referring to the people who get left behind after the ships have set sail. And David said, "Well, fuck them." And Jackson wrote, "For every man."
That's right. He did. That's a true story. The very first time I ever met Jackson, me and David were in the studio, in Wally Hyder's studio in Los Angeles. David had a habit of, he had a buck knife always with him. And he had a habit of making notches in the wood of the studio. And he was doing that. The door opens, Jackson comes in, and David holds up a knife to him. And the first thing that Jackson did was said, "That's my fucking knife," and took it. And I thought, I love this guy. Who the fuck does that to David? I love him. Who is this?
So as far as Wooden Ships goes, it's as hippie as it comes. And even as a 12-year-old, before I'd ever even touched marijuana or anything, I would sit and watch Gimme Shelter. I would watch Woodstock, and I would daydream about those times without really having any clue as to the import of what it was like to live through it. Do you miss being a hippie? Do you miss those times? Not necessarily who you were, but do you miss that era?
I do miss that era. there was a lot of honesty amongst it, particularly in our music. We wanted to be as honest as we could, particularly when we teamed up with Neil. I do miss those times. I must admit to you, I think I'm still a hippie, because what we believed is still true. That we have to take care of each other, because that's all we have on this planet is us and time. We have to take care of time. But, obviously we needed to get rid of the administration of Richard Nixon, But I think I'm still a hippie.
All right, I don't want to get dissuaded here from the record. All right, so Lady of the Island, the only song from your debut not performed at Woodstock for some reason, which is inspired by Joni, right?
Yes.
This was another Hollies reject, wasn't it?
I believe it was. They were not very happy with that, Also the sleep song, in the verse where I said, and when I return, I will kiss your eyes open. I'll take off my clothes and I'll lie by your side. Oh, can't say that. Oh, no. So, yeah, once again, the self-doubt that they tried to give me was taken away by Crosby. And I particularly love his cello line on the recording of, I believe it's the first take.
Well, there's only one take of this song, apparently.
I believe so. Yeah, I mean, because...
Which is amazing.
I know, but we nailed it,
You totally did. And that, the do-do-do harmony work that you guys do, and I could be wrong about this, but is that the invention of David's wordless singing style?
Yes, indeed. And it's between that and Guinnevere was how I knew that, me and Crosby had a lot of music to make.
Right, because he just swoops right in.
That's right.
Instead of rejecting your song, he's adding to it, but he's kind of staying on the periphery of it and allowing you your space. And this is one of your best songs. It's a gorgeous song.
I appreciate that. Yes. Once again, it was the musical trust between David and I. I mean, there's only one take of that song.
Right.
And what Crosby did was what I did to Stephen and David's music. I added to it, but stood back from overdoing it, And that Lady of the Island moment was truly wonderful for us. And once again, it was a choice. Do you do a second track? Why? We nailed it emotionally. Yeah. I think that we nailed the Lady of the Island.
Also, I'm guessing that the reason why it was rejected from the Hollies is because of the sort of morning after the tryst sort of thing. But honestly, when I hear that song from the very start, it always struck me as a song of such profound innocence. There was nothing that felt explicit about it. It's a song that only a young man, I feel, could write. Right. And in that way, you must listen to it with a sort of yearning, I would imagine, if you ever do go back and listen to it. But it's a tremendous piece of work, and it feels like it's mirrored right from your soul.
I agree. I think it is. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you for doing it. Helplessly Hoping could have been an exercise in alliteration, but thankfully it is not at all. It's way beyond that. And this was during your first recording session as a group.
Yep.
So I would actually see this as the more emotionally straight-faced yin to Sweet Judy Blue Eyes' playful yang. It's another Judy song, but it's more regimented as a folk song.
Yeah. And when I played with Judy for about 6 shows, on the one that we did in Carnegie Hall in Manhattan, we did Helplessly Hoping.
That's amazing.
Yes.
A Long Time Gone, which is amazing. Great song. It's also the most overtly political piece on the record. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of Crosby's demo, which I think has a very different feel to it, and it feels as substantive a version as the final piece. But yeah. I heard that after the initial playback, he cried out, "You cats help me find my voice."
It's true. What happened is this. At the recording session in Wally Hyder's studio in Los Angeles, we were trying to get Long Time Gone. We kept trying and we kept trying. And about 2:00 in the morning, Stephen looked at me and David. He said, "You know what? You two go home. Leave me with this. You two go." So we left, We came back the next day, and Stephen, with a big grin on his face, looked at David. He said, "Hey, you want to hear your song?" And David said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, listen." And Stephen and Dallas had made the bed of that song brilliantly. All David had to do was add his guitar and sing. And when he got emotionally involved in singing that song, in fact, he did maybe find a voice of him from within that became the voice of David Crosby.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of his best vocals, probably in his top 5 he ever put down.
Cowboy Movie was pretty good.
That's incredible. It's also, you're never going to find another song on which Jerry Garcia and Neil Young are playing dueling guitars.
Do you want to hear the story?
At the risk of jumping out of, you want to wait till we get there?
Sure.
Okay, because I promise I'm not blowing by it.
Go.
I do want to say, as far as Long Time Gone goes, the version on the Tom Jones TV show with Neil Young is outstanding, with Tom sharing the vocals.
Normally, we would never do anything like that. Particularly if somebody else would take the lead voice. But Tom Jones did it so brilliantly. He was into the song. He really understood what David was trying to say. And yes, indeed, if people want to go on YouTube and watch that performance, I'm playing the B3 organ. Stephen, Neil, and David are playing guitars. We come in the choruses singing. But Tom Jones looked and sounded fabulous.
He really got it.
Yeah.
Before I ever saw it, I thought, oh, this is going to be like a slice of Hollywood, but it's intense.
It is very intense.
It works.
Yes, it did.
And then it wraps up with one of your most underrated songs, I think, 49 Bye-Byes, which I'm not a musician, but it's an upbeat waltz, which I always felt was very tricky to pull off, isn't it?
It is, but we did. 49 Bye-Byes. This entire album is Stephen at his very best.
Right.
And, on 49 Bye-Byes, the vocals are stunning, really.
They are. And, what's interesting to me in having inundated myself with your work is that I see that this is actually like a very hopeful, loving up album. But this song ends on a downer, which is our transition point into Deja Vu.
Yeah.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week, we're kicking off our Pet Sounds Deep Dive with the world's preeminent pet soundsologist, author and expert, Chuck Granata. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. Monday's bonus episode is another Chuck Chat from the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds Interview Series, this one with Brian Wilson's early mentor, Bill Wagner, who was the Four Freshmen's manager. This extremely lucid conversation offers a one-after-the-other cavalcade of precious insights, from the very first visit to Bill's office by a green behind-the-ears Brian in 1958 to the ineffable sadness of later years. Bill passed away back in 2011, which makes this posthumously released interview another priceless buried treasure. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds Deep Dive podcast. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Graham Nash, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68, Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60, Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band, is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod is 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, August 1st, we're coming at you with the Chuck Granata Pet Sounds Deep Dive. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!